Hey everybody, Will and Matt here from Downtime Activities, back with another episode of the Bonus Action Podcast. This one is episode 8, and today we're going over creating a home base for your players.
Overlooked. Very important.
Very overlooked. You're usually our DM, although obviously over the past couple of years I've run quite a bit of stuff as well. But creating home bases is definitely something that you've always enjoyed mixing into your campaigns.
I think it gives so much value to a place or a thing, and it gives your characters a way to kind of tie themselves in and care more. All of a sudden there's something that they've built or taken over or found and then improved and made their own that can be threatened and that can be improved upon more. And it's also, I mean, in a more number crunchy sense, it's a really good way to get your players to spend a ton of gold and not just going and turning their +2 flame tongue into a +3 flame tongue of searing. Like, instead of spending all their money just like, I'm going to do another d6 of damage, it's like, instead I could spend that money and go, like, upgrade the drawbridge on my castle, which sounds rad. And so it gives another way for players, especially in late, like kind of high-end play, high-level play, when you have that giant pile of gold sitting around, to invest in something a little bit bigger than yourself and a little more impactful for the whole party.
Well, so I think we can kind of break down a lot of those concepts sort of one at a time. I think starting with just kind of giving a place for the players to care about, or giving something for the players to be invested in, is a good place to start. And I think that's one of the most valuable things behind the whole concept. I believe the Strongholds and Followers sort of a third-party expansion by Matt Colville, right?
Yes.
Phenomenal rule set, and then there's another expansion sort of for that expansion that sort of adds mass battles. I believe one of the core concepts of that is when you give your players something, you're like, it's like a player's home base isn't their home base until they've had to defend it.
Yeah. You don't get the in that system, you don't get the statistical bonus from it until you've defended it. It's like, yeah, you've got a castle, but it's not your fortress until someone tries to take it from you and you win the day.
And I think you can do that in kind of multiple ways. You can do that in combat, or you can do that even in sort of social encounters or stuff like that. I think the very first D&D campaign that you ran for us is a good example of that. When we were gifted that little plot of land and started building it into a town, it wasn't all that long before we were invited to another lord's keep for this like just sort of welcome party.
Welcoming you as new lords.
Which, like every party in D&D, turned out to be a trap. There was a huge combat. I believe at least one party member ended up poisoned. Probably several. I think that was
got swallowed by a wyvern.
I think that was me, because I'm pretty sure that was the first time my character died in that campaign. The first time that character died in that campaign. But defending it immediately makes the characters invested in it, because not only did they either take it the first time or was it given to them, but now it is theirs. Someone tried to take it from them, and they fought them off and proved to the world that like
this is ours, come take
it. And
if you dare.
And that builds that investment very, very quickly. I think the other thing that I think the two other things that really contribute to that investment are customization and NPCs or storylines that the characters care about being sort of seated there.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, anything that is custom feels much more attached to the person it belongs to. Home bases are absolutely that way, especially if it's something like a village or a keep. Let the players begin to customize it, to build new towers, to design some of the fortifications, to design their emblem, to name it. And it just very quickly makes the characters invested in it, because it's not a cookie cutter location, it is now their place.
And by extension from that, some advice I would give is, regardless of the home base that you're using, and I think later on we can kind of go over some different ideas.
Oh, no, absolutely. There's a lot of variance to the idea.
I would shy away from starting with a nice one. And I would shy away from starting with a together one. If you give them a castle, give them a castle that's run down and decrepit, because then you don't always have to give them a blank plot of land and let them build what they want on it, but you can at least give them, in one way or another, a raw canvas. Like something that has good bones, but doesn't really have the full structure, the whole customization. You don't want to... You can, but typically you want to shy away from being like, here is this perfect, awesome fortress that's got this set up here, and this set up here, and this set up here. Because then it takes away their creativity to be like, ooh, it'd be a really good idea if we set up this kind of a tower here to watch this spot, and it gives them that moment, and again, that kind of buy-in in there, that importance to that location, because it's theirs and they customize it. They didn't just inherit a castle, they got a pile of rubble and they turned it into their castle.
And I think another element of that is it doesn't have to be a good home base that you give them, but I think it should or can in a lot of cases be a unique home base.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Purposefully having a place or a vehicle, again, as we can kind of get into later, that is unique to the players.
Yes.
Again, even if it's sort of a blank slate, again, just immediately invest the characters in it and immediately makes the characters want to claim it as their own. In the first campaign that I ran, you guys cleared this rather unique cult location, and then since it was sort of just outside of the lands of the noble you were working for, he just gave it to you as your. And there were no fortifications. It was really kind of a little
evil temple.
It was kind of a little ruined church on top of a big uplift of stone and some tunnels within it, and. Then, of course, the players built this massive keep on top of that stone uplift and began building a village around it.
And, of course, my arguably lawful evil, but mostly lawful neutral artificer took to making that underground croft his library and laboratory and customized the spaces down there with all of the magical accoutrement that needs. And those kind of things, it was kind of a pretty barren structure, but a very unique and interesting one. And that gave us a blank canvas, but one with a very nice frame, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So that we could draw our own painting, but the structure around it was already very cool and unique and kind of evocative.
Right. And it just builds that investment very quickly. And I never ended up really having you guys defend it. I sort of had some plans leaning that direction, but you guys just... for one thing, never discovered the spy that I planted in your organization.
They tried to stab us. They never stabbed us in the back because they realized it was a bad idea.
Well, I think he stabbed somebody in the back during the final combat, but he was also a rogue with permanent invisibility cast on him. So by the time he realized the fight was going bad, he just left.
Smart decision.
Who knows where he is now?
I assume Hadrian hunted him down.
He was definitely not a man who took anything like that lightly. But blank slates or rundown slates are an excellent vessel for adding that customization and getting the characters involved in it. And then it makes the sort of that inevitable defense more dire. It makes the final completed product more interesting.
And it makes that inevitable defense more rewarding for the players if they had this blank... we'll use the castle because I feel like it's the easiest.
Oh, absolutely.
If you give them this bare bones structure of what used to be a fortress, and they spend a couple months upgrading it and investing their gold into traps and towers and all these things, and then you make them defend it, and those things come into play and work well, then it's not only this thing that's has a value and tie-in and they care about, but then they also get to feel clever and feel like, look at all this effort we put in, man, that really paid off.
Right.
We put so many we put arcane lock on every single door. It was so annoying for the invading army to get anywhere, and we just got to tear them apart.
We cast Glyph of Warding literally everywhere.
Literally everywhere.
Glyph of Warding is just a landmine.
It is. More often
it does
than not.
a lot of damage, and it just stays there until somebody triggers it. So just every day you use all your spell slots to cast Glyph of Warding, and no invading army ever gets successfully through your territory.
They get a couple Glyphs of Warding in, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll go to castle down the street."
Or if you're using something like Savage Worlds or the Star Wars system, just use actual landmines.
Yeah. Depending on your time setting in
it's just the same thing.
It's just the same thing.
And then, of course, the other thing that really quickly builds investment in play groups for a certain area are tying quest lines that they care about or NPCs that they care about into that structure, into that home base. And it's something very easy as well to have NPCs relocate to their home base. Obviously, not every NPC they've met is going to just like leave their ancestral home and
move out to your weird podunk village in the middle of the desert.
But having some NPCs do that, or NPCs that are invested in the characters, or characters inviting NPCs to do so, very quickly begins to build a cast of characters that your player characters care about, don't want anything bad to happen to them. So then when the village is threatened, or when social issues begin to affect their village, they then care much more deeply because it's not affecting this nameless slew of farmer NPCs. It's affecting these merchants, these soldiers, these just interesting NPCs that they've been encountering across the whole game and have become invested in.
It also gives a kind of, for lack of a better word, like a hole to dump the NPCs who are kind of your hangarounds into.
It's true.
It's kind of like the cast of characters that sometimes you slowly collect over a campaign that are, what comes to my mind, it's a little less often like important people, but like in the first D&D campaign I ran for everybody, there was a very important sheep to you all. That was a part of a very fun and cool, memorable moment. And Woolsworth, god of sheep, wasn't going to get left on that little peninsula out in the middle of podunk nowhere. You had to bring him with you. And if you didn't have a like house or a bar or a village or somewhere to like hole him up, then it would have been kind of annoying to have the sheep have to follow you around everywhere you go. And so it kind of gives this dumping pot. And similarly, it gives you a spot to kind of dump off non-quests helping loot.
Yes.
Be that like random larger objects or trophies from big battles. Like I think, again, that
characters love collecting dragon skulls.
Exactly. And if you have a bar you can hang your dragon skull up in, now it's like, oh, sweet. This was taking up so much space on the boat or on the wagon. Now I have it hanging up here and everyone thinks we're super cool and they come to our bar. And so it gives you that place to kind of throw those things and have them still be there, still be part of the story, still have value, but not get in the way of going and adventuring later on.
Well, and when I ran your guys' that big campaign and you guys began to build this keep in the village, NPCs just began sort of showing up, like the sort of redheaded widow and her adorable child, that you guys did.
Saved her teddy bear.
This is a side note. Do goofy, fun quest lines. An adorable,
especially with serious characters.
Yes, absolutely. An adorable child asking this group of heroes to rescue her teddy bear from goblins, and the goblins are worshiping this teddy bear as a god and have built a shrine to it. Is just, and the characters are immediately just like, yes, absolutely, we're going to help you.
Of course.
I believe your whole loot from that quest was an apple pie given, sort of baked as a reward from the girl's mother.
As well as the fear of the goblins, which is invaluable later on.
It did end up paying off, actually. But those characters end up moving to your guys' village and sort of, become sort of important NPCs, and as well as even an NPC that was sort of reviled, but you guys completely, like, permanently disarmed. It was a low-level warlock that you guys killed her patron and just took away her magic power, and she was just kind of this bratty kid.
Yeah.
Like, she just gets dropped off at your guys' castle one day because nobody else knew what to do with her, and you guys are the magic police, so this is your problem now. And everyone, and it's like this constant, just like, oh, it's stupid kids, just always hanging around. But then they're always checking in on the kid and like actually making sure things are going okay, and like it just,
there's still investment there.
Yes, it just builds this group of named characters. And you in particular worked very hard to continue to build that group of named character by sort of recruiting these agents and building this network. But they had a headquarters to belong to. They had, those NPCs were now attached to a place, same as the player characters were. And it just helped to make all of you guys more invested in the place that you were building and the characters who were there.
And similarly with NPCs kind of showing up, they don't all have to be previous encounters or previous friends or allies. Another great thing that this kind of gives you an opportunity for is roles in the party, or like things that the characters want or need that they don't necessarily have access to. Those kind of people who can provide those services will just start showing up. Because if you think in the medieval world, there's only so many people who, like, I specialize in building fortifications. And right now, you are the person building a castle, so I'm going to show up here and offer my services because I want to make money and do my job. And now you have an architect. Now you have someone who is a previous mercenary captain who, like, loves training soldiers, and his mercenary company got taken out. Now you have this really cool kind of grizzled veteran show up and be offered to be the kind of trainer and sergeant at arms for your defense force for your fortress. Those kind of characters start out as kind of a new name, but will, over the course of you returning and fighting alongside or getting access to new things through them, become really important NPCs. And so you can make them part of that story by having them show up and offer the help.
And in a very similar vein to that, it lets characters use skill sets or use knowledge bases that they don't otherwise sort of get to use, or in ways they don't normally get to use. For example, martial classes, especially fighters, rangers, paladins, quite often love to act as trainers.
Oh, yeah.
When you're building your guard force and you're beginning to build your military. And they always come up with these just crazy, goofy, fun methods of training their people. For example, Sir Armstrong training his men how to dodge firebolts because they were fighting cultists.
They're fighting a bunch of cultists, which made a lot of sense.
It's essentially the, like, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball method of training. But it was clear that he was just having so much fun, like, and every time you guys were back at your base, that's what Armstrong spent his time doing, was sparring with soldiers and training soldiers, and here's how you fight a cultist, here's how you fight this kind of enemy, here's how you fight this monster that we've been encountering. And they begin drawing upon that experience and making, and you can just ask for simple rolls and stuff like that. Or Brandon's character, Archibald Finley, starting a garden with these sort of magical plants that you guys were accruing. And those some of those goblins that you had interacted with previously sort of showing up as this goofy little faction that were, like, you guys sort of just immediately recruited and then just had hanging around the base. So then there's just always space for little goofy encounters, and it gives the characters a chance to flex their skills and use their specializations in non-combat or non-like rolling in social encounter kind of ways.
And I think that the importance of that cannot be, right, that needs to be reiterated, because the kind of downtime activities of characters is, there's the way I would kind of word it is, for having a home base takes a character who normally can flex their downtime activities muscles and gives them a stronger way to do it. And then it takes characters who can't normally flex their downtime activities muscles and gives them a really good way to do it. It lets them have the kind of control and building this place to where now you already had your artificer making you magic stuff, but now he gets to build his own workshop and laboratory to build stuff. You already have this. You have this.
And he can have other NPCs assisting him in,
and now you can do bigger and
those
better
projects.
things. Similarly, like Archibald, he was this kind of wacky, wild sorcerer character, and he had this kind of herbalism and that kind of knowledge, but it very rarely got to come up apart from the occasional skill check to identify something. But now all of a sudden, you have your own place. You get to make the rules. It's like, we have a blank plot of land over here. Why not build a greenhouse? And now I can start growing these weird fiery peppers, chop them up and make gunpowder, and like these kind of things that you have that control so you can do. And similarly, like you said, a lot of times during those downtime activities moments, the martial classes or the classes that didn't spec into any sort of crafting or anything like that, maybe they go drink and start a bar fight and do some arm wrestling or something, but they don't get to have that same feeling of like accomplishment a lot of the time. And now they have armed forces to train, or they have whatever else. Maybe they're the lord of the castle. Now they have all these social requirements, and now they have to sit at court and see their people
And
coming
it
forth to
is
them.
an excellent vessel for forcing characters into situations they're not necessarily perfectly geared to handle. I think that is an excellent example of that. Forcing, because quite often when a lordship is up for offer at our game table, we do sort of choose somebody that's like, it should be this person. They should be the one who's like gets the title of lord. And quite often that is a character with a little bit more charisma, or at least a very sort of upstanding or noble character. But if you remove that option and just declare, all right, this person has been knighted, he's now the lord of this little keep somewhere. The keep's full of goblins, but you're a capable man, you can deal with that. But then once that character is established as the lord of that court, they may not well be all that well suited to solving issues of a lord's court, of dispensing justice and dealing with surrounding nobles or planning parties or stuff like that.
Oftentimes, the party is going to pick the knight in shining armor, high charisma paladin to be the lord because he has high charisma, he's noble, he's got this background that he'd perfectly be fit for that. But a lot of times in gameplay, it's the drunken berserker barbarian who saved the princess because he was so mad he crushed everything in his path. And so
everybody else went down in rounds 1 and 2, and
he had that resistance, so he stayed up. And all of a sudden, it's like, our hero, we've knighted you. Now you have to go to this place, and like you have these nobles expecting you to put on like soirees for people to attend, and you're expected to sit and listen to the needs of the village, and like here sit at court. Like you're very much the mindset of cut his head off, and it's like, well, no, sir, that's not how the rules work here. And then you get to have those kind of advisor characters helping them. All that kind of stuff gets to come out. And that's just amazing role play and fun for everyone at the table.
Should we talk about the variety of, or how to do sort of varieties of home bases? Obviously, we talked a lot about keeps or castles.
Yep. A classic.
I think that's probably the one that gets used the most. I think second most is probably tavern or guild hall. Those tend to be quite common, and players love being in control of a tavern.
Oh yeah.
It's just there's just something about it that's
taverns are just peas and carrots.
Well, and then when you run your next campaign, the tavern that all the characters meet in session 1 is your old tavern, supposedly owned by heroes 100 years ago. And taverns are good social places and a good place for to act as message boards. And I think that's another purpose of having a home base, is having a sort of message board within your campaign where NPCs can show up with quests, or
it's also some mailbox where they can send you when they don't have to track you down every time they want to tell you something.
Or when somebody with an NPC needs your help again, they know where to find you. That is a very, I think, overlooked and very vital piece of a home base, is that sort of message board system. It just makes a lot of sense in the world that it's not the Skyrim courier thing where like it's just weird. They find you every time you just walk into a town. It's like, are you just wandering the wilds looking for me? Like, how long have you been out here? It just makes a lot more sense if an NPC just isn't sort of appearing out of nowhere, or a bird isn't. Unless it makes sense for birds to be delivering letters in your campaign.
If you're in the Harry Potter world and you got owls flying around with letters that are magic, great. But otherwise, you need a mailbox eventually for someone to send you a letter saying.
Well, and then it's kind of fun for the characters to return from an adventure, and their advisor or steward is like, all right, here's all the news you received while you were gone, or here's all the sort of quest hooks that showed up while you were out, and it just facilitates that whole process in a much sort of more immersive and cleaner way. And taverns are an excellent place for that. People passing through, showing up with rumors. It's a great way to just have a little bit of passive income for the party, if they're not, defeating dragons and getting huge hordes of gold. And guild halls can just really be the same way. If you're using a guild hall, in theory, your characters are like an adventuring guild, or are sort of a subsect of a larger guild, but it's very much just sort of the same concept. It's a little bit more of sort of a public place than it is the sort of the keep or the village, I guess.
And those are the two classic examples, really, is like Fortress Tavern or some version of those two. But there's lots of different options, both mobile and non-mobile. I think another kind of classic would be like the Wizard's Tower, which oftentimes I feel like gets lumped in with the keep. Like the wizard gets a tower in the keep and makes that their Wizard's Tower. But if you have a more magically inclined party, maybe something along those lines, or even at that point, something that we kind of had happen later on in that first campaign, like school or university. If your characters are especially learned in one thing or another, be it like a martial academy or a school for wizards, now your character can build that and kind of start making that happen. And then those wizard NPCs they've met can become teachers at their school, and those they can kind of start to kind of make their imprint on the world for future generations to come. But it's very interesting when you start making that base mobile. And I think a really great example of this that's used somewhat often is the ship, the boat.
And that was our first home base in that first campaign. As well as having come up a bunch in a variety of other campaigns. Some campaigns are more focused around it. Obviously, if you're doing a more sort of naval campaign, the players are almost certainly going to have a ship.
Eventually, they should.
But the nice thing about using a ship is you get, obviously it's a smaller space, but you get virtually all the same benefits on top of it sort of being mobile and probably being sort of a statted structure, sort of participating in combat usually. Not in every sort of style of campaign, but especially if you're doing a sort of pirate heavy campaign, the ship is going to be a part of combats, and that feels it's sort of the same thing about having to defend your structure. It's once again, it's like your home base is participating in these battles, so you take the damage very personally, and you take the success very personally.
And you take the victories very personally too. I mean, I think to a fairly recent Savage Worlds game we did, that was kind of a very Treasure Planet inspired one where our characters were kind of pirates in space, and not only do you take like they damaged our ship and I care about my ship, but also it's like now my ship starts to build a legend around it. Like this is the ship that sunk this ship. This is the ship that was seen leaving this catastrophe that happened, and like there starts to be a legend that exists around your home base now that you're traveling along, and you bring that legend with you.
And it's once again, it's just an excellent place to collect NPCs and to collect specialized NPCs. I noticed very quickly in that Savage Worlds game that you guys were not terribly well suited to be making boating checks in a campaign that was going to require a lot of boating checks and likely some very difficult ones. So I created an NPC specifically to act as a helmsman based off of sort of an older character concept. And once again, the characters immediately became very invested in Bones. And Bones was the helmsman of every one of your guys' main ships. Yeah. Either your guys' ship or when you customized the Siren to hell and couldn't bear getting rid of it, but then got a cooler ship. It was like, well, we'll go to the cooler ship, and I guess we'll have to find another helmsman for the Siren because Bones is coming with us.
I'm not captain anymore; it's admiral now. Put some respect on the name because I'm starting my fleet.
But it's just exactly what we've been talking about before. The customization and allowing that customization was so important because what you guys bought with the Siren was a bare bones 5th-rate frigate. What it became was this like supernaturally fast, armed to the teeth, just like maneuverable, like legendary pirate vessel. And then when you got a ship that didn't need any customization because it was just completely unique when you got it, was with the Blood of Queen Morgan. Was just sort of the same thing. It had a lot of the same things going for it, and visually it was just such a cool ship that it immediately marked the players as separate from the rest of the world, and invested the characters in it.
And I think that it really goes to show how much investment players have, that we got this upgraded with this ship, and we could have sold the Siren or whatever, but we still had so much love and so much connection with this other boat not only because of the money and effort we put into making it what it was, but also because of the stories that are told through it and the actions we did behind the cannons and wheel of it. It had its own legend and its importance to us. Or like, we can't get rid of the siren. It's the siren, and so it stayed with us as we were sailing along from that point. I guess there's lots of other options for this in bigger and lesser ways as far as like the mobile home base. I think that it's very campaign dependent and very setting dependent.
Absolutely.
I know we've talked in the past about like a campaign set almost entirely on a train, and like a train being the home base.
And obviously, like, that's much more structured, at least as far as where it can move.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you're getting a lot of the same benefits there. You're getting that customization. You're getting that mobile platform, though, so that your home base is traveling with you site to site, and that even no matter sort of what you're exploring, you're still sort of sleeping in your own bed, if that makes sense. And it's another one where it's easy to have the characters have to defend it, and probably defend it more than once, especially if it's post-apocalyptic or something like that.
And another kind of weird middle ground between these two, and that more often than not would be very campaign dependent. This would kind of be the point of the campaign if you're doing it this way, would be something akin to like a traveling circus. For instance, like for most players, until they have a home base, their home base is the trail and wherever they camp for the night, and that's what becomes their home base. But if you instead now have this campaign that's kind of moving in, like, our home base is packed up in 5 or 6 carts we own, and we travel from place to place and set it up. Or it could even similarly be like, if you're kind of doing more warfare-focused campaign, it could be you're kind of a roving band and you set up a war camp at different places you go. And now it's like, we tear our base down and we build it up later, but as we go, we add to it. And now we start with one big tent, and now we have these other smaller tents, and we have this semi-permanent structure that we can throw on wheels and bring with us. And it can still have that same level of customization and that kind of cast of colorful characters that moves along with it, but operating that middle ground between a mobile home base and a permanent one. And
it's very easy to do something kind of weirder with it too. If you're doing a D&D campaign, why not give your players something like Baba Yaga's house, where it's like it's a structure that is capable of walking around, or it's a giant turtle with a tower built on its back or something, because it's getting again kind of that weird middle ground, and it's unique and it's setting the characters apart. Everybody in all the kingdoms are going to know who just rolled into town when the hill-sized turtle comes wandering over the horizon, settles down outside of town, and now there's a wizard's tower over there where there wasn't one there last night.
I love that. It's an amazing concept.
And it's or the Baba Yaga like chicken leg house just settling into the ground, and the players getting a hold of that for the first time is an excellent quest opportunity and an excellent opportunity to meet weird or goofy NPCs. Maybe the sort of Baba Yaga stand-in is just like, I've had enough, I'm retiring, I'm going to go off and travel the world. Here's the deed to my house if you go do this quest for me. And maybe the players don't know that that's going to be their quest reward. Maybe they go on that quest. Like, I don't know if we should be doing a quest for this weird witch, but it seems pretty simple. Go to these 3 places and do this weird thing. Okay, and then when they get back, it's like all right, I'm all packed. See you later. Here's the deed to the house. And then the players are just left with this house on giant chicken legs that they can now move around the countryside in.
And have to kind of figure out how to move around. And especially if you have something along those lines, like the turtle or the chicken leg house or something like that, you now have another amazing opportunity and something that we haven't really discussed, which is almost a new entire category of home bases itself, and that is sentient or semi-sentient home bases that have now become an NPC.
Haunted houses are an excellent example of this.
They're like, I think of the
Dragon Heist
over there. Dragon Heist, the kind of bar you get in the Dragon Heist pre-built adventure. It's this tavern that you get to kind of take over, and it is haunted. There's a ghost there, and now similarly we had a kind of haunting going on with one of our ships in your campaign.
And you guys never got to the point where that ship fully became its own character, but like that was something that I had statted out, was if you sort of earned the loyalty of the ship, you would not need a crew for it to be considered fully manned, and it could make its own like boating and shooting checks. And it would have become very defensive of its crew, and it just in that case becomes becomes an NPC all of its own.
Yeah, and that gives some really cool opportunities. And there's so many different ways to do that, from a haunted house to a wizard's tower on the back of a giant hill-sized turtle. But I would really lean into that as a DM and adding a lot of character to that NPC or NPCs who make up the home base or who are tied into it, because then it just that's somewhere that's worth investing a lot of time in prep work and note writing and kind of character development, because you know it's something that the characters are going to be going back to constantly.
Well, and
you're going to get your money's worth out of it.
You know, I think looking at media for this, like whether a base is sentient or not, it's a good idea to characterize that home base to some degrees. I think Hogwarts is a good example of that. Oh, yeah. Hogwarts is absolutely one of the main characters of the whole Harry Potter series, and you become very familiar with its sort of base level eccentricities and foibles over like early on in the series, and then are just slowly exposed to more and more kind of weird niche things about it. And it is very much one of the characters. It's arguably one of the characters that the core group of characters are interacting with the most. And if you can find ways to characterize your player's home base, you'll get a lot of that same results, and those first experiences and interactions are going to be a lot of fun and are going to be very valuable. And
they're going to be encounters. And it's a good way, I think, too, to kind of, you don't always have to fight for your base. Some of those encounters might be just like, you get Baba Yaga's chicken hut, and all of a sudden you got to figure out how to steer it, and you got to talk to this weird house and figure out how do I make this thing move where I want it to move, and maybe that's a whole encounter in and of itself, is just figuring that out. Or having a hard social interaction with this ancient giant turtle that you want to build a tower on the back of, and befriending and making trust. And that can be a quest line you go on for these NPCs that are tied into the base. Or it could be in its own way, like that interaction with them is a different sort of encounter right then and there.
Well, and the players sort of discovering the mechanics, for loose of a better word, of how the base sort of operates, or how elements of it operate, are going to make for an excellent session. Yeah. Especially if the players are already starting to get invested or interested in this sort of thing that they've acquired. Those early days of like starting to figure out how some stuff works, or thinking they know how something works and then being completely wrong, are going to are just going to make everything much more flavorful. And we've talked a lot about like things contributing to making worlds feel alive. Mm-hmm. And I think characterizing, at least to some degrees, the home base of the players is going to help that a lot.
Oh, yeah. I feel like a good kind of next big talking point to go over, a lot of this advice is from the DM side of things, and like how to create a home base, or how to set up something for the players to nestle into and build and make their own, or what kind of options you have for building up a home base. There's another side of every coin when it comes to D&D. There's the DM side, and there's the player side. As a player, you should be seeking out an opportunity to build a home base. If your DM doesn't hand it to you, if it's a campaign that functionally allows it, you should work towards something like that. And if the DM gives you an opportunity, gives you that blank canvas, start painting. Like, don't just be like, okay, cool, I want to go fight the next fight. I mean, if that's your play group and you just want to kind of dungeon crawl, good for you. But if you're the play group that has those home bases, like, put effort into it,
Absolutely.
Put thought into it, and make it your own. There's lots of opportunities there, and for creativity to be expressed in so many different ways.
Well, and in the very first ship we ever ended up with in a D&D campaign, we were just traveling with some NPC friends of ours, sort of like we don't want to be here anymore. We've got our freedom. Let's go out there into the world and explore. This city's been under siege for like a decade. Let's go see what's going on with that. That could be fun. And we're just traveling with, essentially traveling with some smugglers. Mm-hmm. We get stopped by like an Imperial Customs vessel, and that's where the session ended. So we kind of had a week to like plan. And we didn't tell you, the DM, about this at all. We just like started talking about it, and we're very quickly. It was, and you know, the first half of the discussion is like, all right, how do we just sink this ship? How do we get out of here as quick and as clean as possible? Like, like how do we get out? And then immediately it was like, what if we didn't destroy the ship? I know how to sail a ship now. So then we lit upon the much harder strategy of somehow keeping the ship completely intact because we were already considering it ours. It's like, we don't want to blow it up, it's ours. Mm-hmm. It might be flying their flag at the moment, but that's our ship.
That's our boat.
They just came and delivered it to us.
Of it. Use Ivard's black tentacles instead of fireballs, so we kill all the crew instead of blowing the ship up.
And we made that fight much harder for ourselves because of it.
But the reward was much greater.
But then we had our own ship, and we immediately sank money into customizing it and sort of refitting it. And then we used that ship for a long time. Mm-hmm. Just bouncing back and forth sort of around the various elements of this empire.
It was pretty early on in the campaign when you got that boat, and it was literally the end of the campaign. 2 of the characters sailing off into the sunset on that boat was like part of it. Like it was something that I didn't intend to make as a home base for you guys, but you grabbed a hold of, you made your own, and it literally followed you through until beyond the campaign and into future campaigns. Well,
until we got, even really after we got this empty plot of land that we started building into a town, it served so much as our home base. When we went to rescue Sparadauer's wife, mm-hmm. we purposefully, like, the ship was sort of a core concept of our infiltration and escape plan, because we knew we could get pretty close along the coast and keep our home base hidden nearby until we could jump on board it sort of at a full sprint and sail away. But you didn't present this ship as that kind of option. It was just meant to be a combat counter, mm-hmm. a combat encounter. But it took us a couple of days. Luckily, we had a week of downtime to think about it. But then we began viewing it as this opportunity and as a chance to have something of our own, which our characters really needed at that point in the campaign. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. Like, players should seek out opportunities to turn something into a home base if they can. It doesn't truly work in every.
And don't punish that as a DM.
No, absolutely
as a DM,
not.
Support that and build that up. It's like, you may have had a different idea for what their home base was going to be, but if they attach onto something or they have a cool idea and they start working towards that, you can put fun roadblocks in the way that are like obstacles to overcome, but don't try and force them away from that because you don't want it. I mean, if it's going to ruin your campaign, whatever. But I could have very easily been tried to shift that combat in a way where accidentally that boat takes damage so that you guys aren't able to sail away in it. But that doesn't really, especially at that point in the campaign, the whole point was the world's your oyster, what do you do next? And now you have the capability to do that solo. You can sail wherever you want. And that's a beautiful and great thing and gives you all that freedom. So roll with that as a DM and build it up and give them resources to pump into.
And since it's a sort of medieval fantasy campaign, it's not like an armed vessel that we've just gotten a hold of. It's not. This thing doesn't have a full gun deck and is running 40 guns. So it doesn't necessarily make our characters any overpowered in any combat encounters, and in fact, it's at times just a hindrance. It sort of starts. It was sort of where the start of our joke about every time if you step foot on a boat, you roll a D100, and if it's a 1, it's a Kraken.
Yeah, the Kraken roll.
And it's come up as a 1 more than once. Mm-hmm. Luckily, it wasn't our ship that fell afoul of the Kraken in that campaign. It was a rented boat because the 2 rogues were off on a sneaky criminal operation.
Rest in peace, criminal no names who went along with you. I think they had names, but I couldn't tell you what they are anymore. But those guys who came along served as good Kraken obstacles.
Distractions.
Distractions. The word.
But and I think that sort of just flavored how I've always approached D&D as a player. Is quite often in a lot of campaigns, if it fits the character and if the DM isn't going to just sort of dangle a home base in front of us, I'm going to go looking for one. Mm-hmm. And it's another important note with that. So again, for the DMs, home bases should not be end game loot. No. They should be fairly early on, because the players aren't going to get any benefit out of it if they get it at the end of the campaign. Mm-hmm. They're just all the stuff we're talking about, using it as a quest hub, using it as a gathering place or dropping off place for NPCs, defending it and building it up. It works best if it happens early on. You don't necessarily want it to happen session 1 unless that is a core element of the campaign. For example, you're running a very sort of Dune-inspired D&D campaign at the moment, where a noble house in this sort of new world that mines a valuable resource has been deposed. A new noble house has been put in charge, and they are now having to deal with all the social issues the previous morally corrupt royal house left behind, as well as knowing that sooner or later they're probably going to come back and try and take it from you. Mm-hmm. In that case, yes, it makes sense that we end up in that position session 1. For a lot of just... If your characters are all meeting in a tavern, it doesn't necessarily make sense if by the end of session 1, one of those characters has the deed to the tavern.
Yeah.
That could be a lot of fun, but it kind of has to be an element of the sort of core theory, I guess, of the campaign in order for it to happen that early, but it should happen earlier on in the campaign rather than later.
It goes back to the kind of the main concept we were talking about early on, about how you kind of give this cool frame around a blank canvas. If you don't do that until the end, then it's like, all right, we've slain the lich, we've saved the land, now we get a keep, and we have all this money, and we build it, and it's really neat. Good campaign, everybody. Shake hands. Let's go plan the next one. Instead of this, like, it gives time for those changes to happen, and then those opportunities for those defenses you've added to your fortress to come in and save the day. And it allows you to kind of spread out the amount of time that customization and those threats happen.
Right.
And it allows you to not have to, like, just drop a giant pile of loot onto the player so they can afford to make this thing interesting at the end of the game. Instead, it's over their course of adventuring, they can put some money away and use it. And similarly, that kind of brings up another topic, which is you need to reward your players in a quantifiable amount that will work towards that goal. And then as a player, you should invest into your home instead of like, oh, we just got this big pile of money. What cool magic item am I going to buy with all of this money?
And there's probably going to be some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But especially, there's a lot of campaigns where just buying every magic item that's in the DMG isn't really an option.
There's not always a magic shop.
You made
especially in 5e.
You made it pretty available in the sort of that first campaign that we ran, mm-hmm. and in the campaign that I ran, you sort of worked through the crafting rules to sort of make a lot of the magic items that you wanted, mm-hmm. Which is arguably just sort of the better route than just having the players be able to hop on down to the corner store and just pick them up. Or if they can hop down to the corner store and buy magic items, they should be weird. They should be unique. It should be that creepy, tall, thin dude with the weird voice that your characters fell in love with the first time they met him because he was just weird and goofy, and then moved his whole shop to your settlement.
A brief side note here for DMs out there: if you're going to design an NPC and you're just like, what? You're like, I have to come up with NPC off the top of my head. Let's just go like this. Don't use like your recurring nightmare sleep paralysis demon from your childhood as the basis for that character, because your players will inevitably fall in love with them and you'll have to relive those nightmares every single time you roleplay them. Brief side note here, but back to home bases.
But in a lot of campaigns, it is easier than DMs think to give out large amounts of currency mm-hmm. if the players can't just buy that kind of loot. And if they want that kind of loot, make them craft it or make them go on quests for it. And once again, use that quest hub that you've built and given the players to facilitate some of that.
I mean, there are some campaigns out there that are very much we're adventurers, we go adventure because we want to make money. And so there's kind of this idea that, like, eventually we'll get enough money, why would we adventure anymore? But I don't think that is the average D&D campaign, or the average campaign in general. Almost all campaigns, to differing levels of severity, have a bigger picture in mind. There is a overarching threat, or a catastrophe that needs to be prevented, or something along those lines. So the players aren't going to be like, oh, a big pile of money, time to retire. Like, that's not really going to happen in a majority of games. And so giving players a big pile of money doesn't really solve the problem that the big problem they're needing to solve more often than not. And then it's just them being like, well, we have all this loot, we need to use it for something. And if you have a home base, that's a very natural funnel for it. And then they get to
especially if the
customize.
characters are already having plans about, like, let's build a tavern, let's build another tower, let's upgrade the size of the keep, let's do this, let's do that. If they've got this whole list of projects in mind, and that works best if they're starting with a blank slate or starting with something that needs work, they're going to more naturally funnel money into that into that route when that money is available. I played a character. He died halfway through the campaign, and that was halfway through when we stopped just playing the campaign. Where I assassinated mayor. You ended up as the new mayor, and because of the social situation going on in the continent at that point, nobody could say you weren't the mayor. And we were just now left with this, like, rather large, decaying, undefendable city that you were suddenly in charge of and were very invested in.
And my character was an absolute psychopath who would not be good for that role or be like somebody would trust in that sort of
And I had to... I had a list going of, like, okay, here's the ludicrous amount of money we're going to need to turn this city into an actual, like, rebuilt, walled city, and here's all the work we need to do. And it was just, like, hundreds of thousands of gold. My character died, and that campaign ended before we got a chance to really go down that route. But if we had ended up with huge piles of money going forward, it would have been quite easy, and it would have been quite natural to just go back to that list and begin checking things off of it. And if players are invested enough in this sort of blank slate place and speaking to players, come up with, like, I mean, sky's the limit really as far as customization. Make a big list of all the different things you want to do, so that way when you have the money, when you have the resources, when you're owed those favors, you can begin checking stuff off of that list and slowly building it into the place or the ship that you want it to be.
And the key there is make the list, and you were saying, like, slowly checking stuff off. As a DM, you don't have to be like, oh, I gave them a castle. The next quest reward is 1 million gold so they can customize their castle to whatever they want it to be. Like, give them enough that they can start customizing it, and then they keep customizing it, and it's kind of this you know, it's that old guy passion project, that thing that's, like,
Right.
never quite done. There's always like, oh, I could just, by the time I've really finished it, then the first 3 things I changed are out of date now, and I need to get the new this, or like, it's like the car out in the garage. That there's always something else you could do to make it new and cool and interesting. And so it kind of becomes a driving force in your adventures and stuff. And so it doesn't mean that the amount that's needed to get to the end goal has to be dropped on them as soon as they have this home base. It's just a place for them to funnel resources, so give extra resources so they can do that over the course of your campaign.
Or have them sort of meet some of the crafting requirements. Have them, if they find ways to acquire the stone or to acquire the workers to quarry the stone, let that cover some of the cost of those repairs or some of that building.
And have it take time.
Absolutely.
That's another big point, like, especially with structures. Have it take time so that the characters get to have that, like, we leave our village, we go and we do this big adventure, we come back, wow, look, our walls are done now. How cool is
And
that?
it's, if your campaign supports it, I really like using a calendar to actually keep track of days going by. Not only does it put in perspective how much time actually passes, but it gives characters certain dates to sort of keep track of every year. The sort of very mild birthday party celebrations that you guys did in that campaign, or lack of.
Yes. Or intentionally not allowing people to know when your birthday is so they don't try and throw you a birthday party.
And then as
legend.
the DM, knowing, or just putting a date on the calendar of, like, here's the day the keep will be done. Here's the day the walls will be done. And then you kind of do seasonal changes around the place as well, and it again just adds to a lot of that immersion, and helps us, so it's not the video game thing of, like, oh, I paid for the walls to be fixed and they're fixed.
They appear. Yeah.
It's like there is a passage of time, and then if important events are happening in the midst of those construction projects, in the midst of rebuilding the city walls and like relaying the foundations, they ran into a crypt and progress has been halted until the Lord decides to deal with that. Or if an attack comes while your defenses are only half built, it's going to entirely change how the defense of that location is going to play out and where the focus needs to be.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a decent place to kind of give some last thoughts. It really comes down to use home bases. As a DM, make it important, make it a part of your story, make it have a lot of character, but leave lots of room for the characters to customize it. And as a player, seek it out. If it's not handed to you, grab it from somewhere else. If it's
go take somebody else's.
Go take someone else's. If it is handed to you, take it and make it your own and invest. Like, it's so worth the time and effort that you spend coming up with those ideas. So long as, back to the DM, you make it matter. You threaten the base so they can defend it. You show the passage of time and what happens and what the results of their choices and their actions are, and just gives this really cool, grounded piece of the world that the characters have made their own.
Stock it with items and NPCs that the characters care about. Give them a place to collect those or to send those, and let their choices matter, both for that structure, that home base itself, as well as the world around it and how the characters are interacting with the world around it.
There's almost always an opportunity for a home base. There's very few campaigns where it doesn't work. You could have your pirate campaign, a boat. You have your medieval campaign, a castle. There's always a way to make a place or a thing that the characters are tied to that is home to them, that they can invest that thought and that those resources into. Hope you found this helpful. Hope you found it interesting. We've got lots of bonus actions out. This is the 8th one now, so lots of all sorts of different RPG concepts. We just kind of talk long-winded like this about it and ramble to each other. If you want a little more concise or kind of detailed facts, we also have our help action, which is mainly based around 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and it's really taking a kind of core concept and doing the number crunchy side of how to go about doing it or our opinions on a system.
Breaking down specific rule sets and stuff like that.
We've also got a ton of live play on the channel. Feel free to check any and all of that stuff out. Now go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities. Thank you, everybody.
Reading through the episodes.
Did you read the very last one?
Yes, the last one, and it's like, well, off we go to Nar Shaddaa. It's like, no, don't go there. That's a terrible idea. Definitely don't go asking around about this guy. Definitely don't go asking around about a missing crate. Definitely don't talk to the Nebula Syndicate.
It's literally like that wasn't even me sewing plots. All right, that was literally them being like, all right, the world is our oyster. Where do we go to next? And them asking me about like, I want somewhere nearby out here in the Outer Rim to where we are right now. That's gonna be somewhere like urban sprawl, something where like the Empire doesn't have a heavy presence. Where we can kind of get involved in some shadier stuff to make ends meet for a while. I was like, well, I mean, there's always Tatooine, or like if you're looking for more city, Nar Shaddaa, I suppose. And like, that's the one, we want to go there.
It's just like, well, I mean, I happen to know of an organization that just lost their best contractor, so they might be looking for somebody to fill that gap. But I'm just worried they're going to go there, start asking questions, and they're going to catch the bullet meant for me. I kicked a hornet's nest, left town, and then a couple of people drove up. A couple
of kids came to play under the tree where you kicked the hornet's nest.
Yeah, and like that's what I'm worried is about to happen.
Which is something I constantly have to remind myself when running their game, is that I believe Matty G's character is like 14, 16, something like he's a teenager, and Jocelyn's character is technically 7 or 8 years old. She's just a species that's really big naturally, even at a young age. It's like, oh yeah, You guys are children, like actually kids. And I'm making you do I'm making you do and witness horrible things for children. That's the Jedi wife.